All right, so it's time for the April wrap up. I'll pick out my book of the month and then talk about what I'm going to read in May. So for most of these books that I read in April, I did longer full video reviews or discussions with other people, and I'll post those down in the description if you want more information. But the first book I finished this month was Babel 17 by Samuel R. Delany. This was a buddy read with Chris over at Liminal Spaces, and we both really loved this book, had a blast talking about it. And it was good because the first book that I had read from Delany was The Einstein Intersection, and I did not like that book at all. This was almost the opposite reaction. I loved almost everything about this. It gets into some concepts of language, but there's all this action, these interesting characters. Samuel R. Delany just took a bunch of interesting ideas, put it together in a perfect package almost, in my opinion. And me and Chris just both loved the book and had a great time talking about it. So next up, this is a book that I didn't really read in April, but I finally got around to doing a video on the best of John Collier. And I had been slowly reading these short stories over months and months because I think there's something like 40 some odd short stories in this collection. It's like a 500-page book. And this is some very weird, older fiction. A lot of it isn't really science fiction, which is fine. There's some horror, but most of it's just kind of like literary tales or just strange tales. And Collier isn't talked about a lot lately, but if you get a chance to find some of his stories, you got to give him a go. He was a very literate writer. He wrote very well. He was published in a lot of mainstream magazines, and he comes up with some very interesting, bizarre ideas. And I really enjoyed the collection overall. It was long, and I had to space it out, which I think was a good plan. And it definitely gets the award for the longest time I spent making a thumbnail for the video. Pretty proud of that one. I've kind of used it as my channel icon. So next up was Empire by Clifford Simak. And this is part of an ongoing almost monthly read we're doing with Sean D. Stanfast and others. And if people didn't know, this book was originally written by John W. Campbell when he was pretty young, and he didn't really like the novel, and so he put it on the shelf. And then at one point he asked Simak if he would try to rewrite it. So Simak did, gave it back to Campbell, and Campbell still didn't like it and kind of refused to publish it. So years later, H.L. Gold, I think it was, in Galaxy magazine, he was the editor there. He found out about this and published it. And, I did not like this one at all. It didn't feel like a Simak book at all. It was very pulpy, very kind of surface level book. It's an oddity in the catalog of Simak because he truly didn't originally write the story. I am glad I read it. It was pretty short, but not one that I would recommend to many people. And then next up was Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis. This was a buddy read with Sam over at Captain Samuel's Sigils, and we both had a blast talking about this one. Most people know of C.S. Lewis for like the Narnia books and his fantasy, but he wrote science fiction, and this is science fiction that kind of has like a religious overtone, or I would say more spirituality themes and ideas in it. And it was really good. For something that was written in the 30s, this was a lot better quality writing. It wasn't pulpy, just because C.S. Lewis was such a great author. And me and Sam had a blast talking about this. He went and read this one twice. He teased out a lot of extra information that I don't think a lot of people would catch on the first pass through. So our discussion was great. It really elevated my read of it. He brought up some really great, interesting points in that video. And it's part of a trilogy called like the Space Trilogy, or it kind of goes by a couple other names. And it's piqued my interest definitely enough to want to read the other books in the trilogy. So at some point in the near future, I'll be reading the rest of the books. And then I read This Perfect Day by Ira Levin. This was another author that is probably most known for just his fiction or horror, but he wrote some science fiction. This is kind of a dystopian science fiction novel of a future where humanity has kind of been drugged into a complacency and sameness amongst the whole population of the planet. There's some, utopia aspects of this society, and there's definitely some dystopian aspects of this society. It was an interesting story. Levin is a great writer, but there was some parts in this book that weren't that great of writing and kind of made it feel a little dated, but overall, I enjoyed it. It was a great concept and a really good, pretty good execution. But I think I ended up giving that one 3 stars. But it's definitely worth checking out if you're into, some older dystopian science fiction. And then I read The Dying Earth by Jack Vance. This was a buddy read with a channel viewer. His name is Jonathan, and this is a collection of short stories. I didn't even know that going into this. Some of the stories are sort of linked, but some of them aren't. And they all take place in this, future dying Earth, but they really read like fantasy. And didn't know a lot about this going in. And me and Jonathan had a great time talking about this. There's other stories that Vance wrote in this same kind of Tales of the Dying Earth, so I'm definitely going to be reading those slowly, maybe over the next year or so. And go check out that video if you didn't already. We had a lot of interesting things to talk about because the characters are so zany and wild, the predicaments they get into, the setting of this strange dying Earth with all the creatures and everything that's going on there's just a lot to love about that one. I'm glad I finally got around to reading that classic. And then the next book I read was The Dark Design by Philip Jose Farmer. I am determined to read through the Riverworld books. This is book 3. And I really enjoyed the first 2 books. Book 1 is mostly about Richard Burton and his experience on the Riverworld. Book 2 is Mark Twain or Samuel Clemens and his experience on the Riverworld. And at the end of book 2, The Fabulous Riverboat, these plot lines are going to converge. And, this was a long book. I think this was longer than the first 2 combined. The plot lines did converge. There's kind of a third plot line added. But I kind of struggled through parts of this book. It sort of derailed my reading for the month. I'm not going to do a dedicated video on this one. I'm going to do like a overall video of the whole series when I'm done. Even though I didn't like this one too much, there was some things to like about this one. There's some funny parts. There's some interesting parts. But man, was this a slog at times. The one thing I will say, though, it felt like Farmer really had a good time writing this. You could see that in the writing. He was probably just having a blast going through all this. But man, I struggled through parts of that one. But I'm determined. I'm going to go on to the Magic Labyrinth maybe at some point. Probably not in May, but like I said, I'm determined to finish the series. And then the last book I read in the month of April was The Big Time by Fritz Leiber. Did a pretty short video on this one if you haven't checked it out. There is some things I really liked, some things I didn't. I feel I'm always kind of bipolar when it comes to Leiber and his writing. But it was still, it was very short. It's like 120 some pages and some really great concepts and ideas he had in that one. Just overall, not the biggest fan of it, but now, I had a couple leftovers from last month's TBR. The Masks of the Illuminati by Robert Anton Wilson. I'm about halfway through with this one right now. I'm enjoying it. It's very different. I'll do a whole video. That'll be my next video review that I come out with. And then The Wife's Wild Card will probably be the next book I read after Masks of the Illuminati. And now on to some other books, some ideas that I have for the month. I like to get around to Lest Darkness Falls by L. Sprague de Camp. This would be a reread for me. Islands in the Net by Bruce Sterling. I haven't read anything from Sterling yet, and this is part of the series that I'm doing, the Masterpieces of Science Fiction, so I'd like to get to that. Simulacron 3 by Daniel F. Galouye. Galouye is an author I have not read yet, and I really want to check him out, so I'd like to get to that in May for sure. Timescape by Gregory Benford. This is a reread for me. It's a kind of a longer book. I may or may not get to that in the month. We'll just have to see how my mood takes me. And then I've been kind of reading through some humorous science fiction, hit a bunch of different authors, but Robert Sheckley is one that I haven't read yet. So I'd really like to read the Immortality Inc. by Sheckley. I've got a lot of recommendations to check him out. And then I've been really enjoying reading a bunch of different short stories in between all the novels. So I've started reading Change the Sky and Other Stories by Margaret St. Clair. I read the first story in this collection. Really excited to read more of her stuff. And then if I have time either this month or maybe pushed into next month, I have yet to read anything from Alistair Reynolds, and I kind of picked up this giant hardback Century Rain a while ago. It's a bigger book, but I kind of asked some people. They said this would probably be a good place to start with Reynolds. I know House of Suns is definitely recommended, but I don't have a copy of that one yet. So I need to read a little bit more modern science fiction here and there. You know, I used to read a lot more, but I'm just in this zone of reading a lot of the classic stuff and really enjoying it. But I do enjoy more modern stuff as well. So I kind of just want to mix some of that in. So, you know, that's the wrap up for me. You know, let me know what you read in April. What were some of your favorite books you read, and what are you thinking about reading in May? So that's going to do it for this video. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.